Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them, male and female. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth." God also said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. This food will be for you, for all the wildlife of the earth, for every bird of the sky, and for every creature that crawls on the earth, everything having the breath of life in it. I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Evening came, and then the morning, the sixth day.
Thank you, Matthew. This morning we're in the middle of a series looking at our various roles and responsibilities that we have. And we've been looking at what a role and what a responsibility really are in the first place. And by roles, we don't mean playing a role in a play. We're not talking about pretending. We're talking about taking on tasks. Entering into a place where we have a designed effort to make. And I use the example of a translator. For example, a translator has a role that they play in a specific situation. And they don't pretend to play that role. They actually do it. They accomplish it. They will translate for someone while you're talking to them. Now, last week we looked at what it means to put on the new self. That's really where we started with this idea of roles and responsibilities of the new self. That we are to be someone who we were not before. And we're to change from who we were into someone we haven't been yet. Now that's going to be the basis for all of these roles and responsibilities. Is the new self, being someone new, someone who is made in the image of God, someone who puts on the image of Christ. But within our lives and our roles and responsibilities we have, there are now going to be different sections. So we are our new self, but we have family. And by family, I mean biological family or immediate family, which is separate often from the church. Not for everyone, but for many people that is separate from our church family. And within the church, we also have various roles and responsibilities that we take on that is based on also the new self as well. So for the next few weeks, we're really going to be looking at two different sections. One is going to be the family. The family life that we have, who we are within our families, the responsibilities we have within our own families. And then we're going to look at the church, who we are within the church, and the various roles and responsibilities we have within the church. This morning we're starting with the family unit as a whole. And next week we're really going to start getting into the roles of what it is that makes up a family: husbands, wives, parents, children, that kind of a thing. But this morning we're going to just start really with the family very generally, and what the Bible has to say about a family and the examples of family in the Bible, because the family is really going to be our first introduction to life. That's our first introduction to social responsibilities, how to interact with people. You learn that as you enter into a family. It's our first introduction for forgiving people. Sometimes you've got to forgive your siblings, you've got to forgive your parents. It's our first introduction to work, isn't it? For many of us, you learn how to work when you first enter into the family. You're given chores and that kind of a thing. The family is really our first introduction to much of the world. And I want us to look at what God has to say about family, because the Bible has a lot to say about family. In fact, if you were to take out the concept of family from our world, you would not have the Bible. This morning, we're talking all about genealogy. That's all family. Family is central to the Bible. It's central to who we are. It's central to creation. I had Matthew read that passage for us because that was God's plan right from the beginning. That there's a husband and a wife and they have offspring. Family is a part of creation. Now this morning is going to be a topical lesson. And if you have sat in on my topical lessons, you've heard me say what I'm about to say, which is that we're going to look at a number of passages, and I'm going to have these passages on the board for you. All of my passages will be taken from the ESV that are on the board. You're more than welcome to follow along in your own Bibles, but for the sake of time, we've really got to stick to the passages that I'm going to be going through quickly. So we're just going to have to jump right into this. So what does the Bible say about family? So what does the Bible show us about family? What are biblical examples and teachings that we learn about the family? First of all, the family is from God. I had Matthew read from us Genesis 1:26 through 31. It's a part of creation. This is something that comes from the mind of God. And it's a part of our world and what makes up how we experience the world. And for many people, though, within that, there are different levels of how we experience family, what it means to be a family. Some people grow up in orphanages and foster homes, so they have different ideas about family and that kind of a thing. But family is a part of creation. And family and being a part of a family is a blessing from God. So this passage here from Psalm 68, verses 5 through 6, we read, "Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a parched land." Now, if you remember from Clay's class on the Psalms, that within the Psalms there's a literary technique where you say the same thing twice, but in a different way to kind of get a different message across. So you have this image of God who protects the fatherless and the widows, and he settles the solitary, right? That's going to be fatherless and widows in a home. To put it another way, he leads out the prisoners to prosperity. This idea of being a part of a home is a great blessing and is a form of prosperity. So the family is from God. It comes from God. It's a part of creation, and it's a way God blesses people to make them a part of a family, to give them homes to dwell in, to give them relationships to have that are that close and intimate. Another thing we learn about the family is that from the biblical point of view, having a life apart from a family just doesn't exist. This idea of I live my life and there's my family and here's my family, here's my friends, here are my coworkers, that's not really a biblical point of view. The biblical view is you are a part of your family. Those are people who you have primary responsibilities toward even. You are a part of your family. That's really a Western individualist view to say that you are not a part of your family, or you can just kind of disconnect based on choice. That's really not a biblical view. In fact, in the biblical culture, family was everything. That was how you lived your life. And to be fair, for much of the world today even, that's still true. I know it's hard in our society to imagine it like that, but if you go to places that are very non-Western and individualistic, this is how they really live their lives. The family is everything. You are a part of your family. So in the Bible, family is how a person finds a spouse. Consider Genesis 28 verses 1 and 2. This is where Isaac says to Jacob, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." So family was actually how many people found a spouse. Now, I want to be clear, we're not going to look at it, but in Leviticus 18, verses 6 through 18, you can read it on your own if you'd like, incest is specifically forbidden. So we're not talking about immediate family, we're talking about distant family that people would find spouses in, although really under that law, even Abraham should not have married Sarah. But under the Levitical priesthood, this kind of incest was specifically forbidden. So that's how you live your life. You are a member of a family. And it's much more than the nuclear family, where we're talking about just parents and children. We're talking about extended family as a part of your family. I think many people who, if you've not grown up in America or if you're from the South, you probably have a very good understanding of this, where your extended family is still your family. They're not too distant. In fact, so in biblical culture, you live your life as a member of a family, including things like rejoicing in God and worshiping together. This is commanded in Deuteronomy 12. So in Deuteronomy 12, this is really verses 3 through 7, before I had 5 through 7. God says, "You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their Asherim with fire. You shall chop down the carved images of their gods and destroy their name out of that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way." So don't worship as the pagans have been worshipped. Instead, you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and all your households, in all that you undertake in which the Lord your God has blessed you. So you don't worship like the pagans. Instead, you worship in this way, and you do it with your family. That was really the biblical point of view. You lived your life as a member of a family. You worshiped with your family. You rejoiced in the Lord with your family. Some more biblical teachings and examples about family that we find in the Bible is the family is a place of vulnerability. The family is a place where you're exposed in many ways. You're exposed for your weaknesses. You're exposed for the decisions you've made. You can't really hide in family. Now, this is both good and bad. So it's good because the truth is, if you're never vulnerable, you are always putting on a show. I'm going to say that again. If you are never vulnerable, you are always pretending, because everyone is vulnerable. And you can really learn this in family. That I need to learn how to be vulnerable in front of people without being embarrassed. So consider, for example, Moses and Jethro. In Exodus 18, verses 13 through 18, we read, "The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses, his father-in-law, saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, 'What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?' And Moses said to his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws.' Moses, his father-in-law, said to him, 'What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone.'" He goes on and convinces Moses that this is actually right. Now, how many of us, if we're approached by our father-in-laws, are going to pretend and say, well, no, I'm fine, I can take care of this? And that wasn't Moses' response. And I think it's a very admirable response. To recognize this is my weakness. And even if family approaches me, I'm honest with family. And I say, yes, this is my weakness and I need help in this. Within the same chapter, actually, Moses shares his experiences of God with Jethro. That can be a source of tremendous vulnerability for some of us, can't it? To talk about God with family. Even if our family believes, that can be really difficult. To sit down and say, this is what God has done for me in my life. And yet this is what Moses does. So you look in Exodus 18, verses 8 through 11. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people." That's really hard sometimes, isn't it? To sit down with family and say, this is what God has done in my life. This is how he's answered prayers. These are the tremendous blessings he's done. This is how he saved me and rescued me. And I want you to notice Jethro's response. He says right at the very end, now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. Up until this point, it really implies he wasn't convinced. And yet Moses, being vulnerable with his family, convinces Jethro that God is a God of gods. So family can be a place of vulnerability, can't it? And sometimes that's really good for us, to be vulnerable in front of people, to ask for help, to be honest about what we really believe, to be honest about what's really important to us, and to share this with family. But of course, it can be difficult as well, because that also might mean that family takes advantage of us. If you're vulnerable with people, you can be easily taken advantage of, can't you? Consider, for example, Jacob and Rebekah taking advantage of Esau. So in Genesis 27, verses 5 through 10, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, bring me game and prepare for me delicious food that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves, and you shall bring it to your father to eat so that he may bless you before he dies. And I'm sure many of you know what happens from here on out. That's family. I mean, this is a mother and a son plotting against another son and the father. And the father, Isaac, I mean, he's bedridden. He's extremely vulnerable at this point. Now, obviously, God works all of this for good. And to be fair, Esau did sell his birthright earlier. But sometimes family takes advantage of us. That's a part of being vulnerable. Is there are good things that come out of it, but there are also some really hard things that come out of it. Consider, for example, as well, Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers. So in Genesis 37, 25 through 28, then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Those are brothers. That's family. Taking advantage of someone's vulnerability. That can be both a very good thing and also a very difficult thing, that we're vulnerable around family. I want to continue this idea that family is a place of vulnerability and get us into another difficult truth, which is that family can lead each other to sin. That's one of the difficulties about being vulnerable around family. It's one of the examples we see in Scripture. For example, heads of households can lead the family to sin. So you have the account of Achan, if you remember in Joshua 7, verses 24 through 26, where God had told them not to take anything. All of it was to be devoted to destruction from the towns they go in and conquer, and yet Achan takes some things and hides it within his family around where they are. And they find out who it is. And after they find out, in Joshua 7, 24 through 26, we read, "And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, the son of Zerah, and the silver and the cloak and the bar of gold, and his sons and daughters, and his oxen and donkeys and sheep and his tent and all that he had, and they brought them up to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, 'Why did you bring trouble on us? The Lord brings trouble on you today.' And all Israel stoned him with stones. They burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones that remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his burning anger. Therefore, to this day, the name of that place is called the Valley of Achor." Now, the family, you can read this one of two ways. They either knew or they didn't know. If they knew and didn't say anything, right, he had led them into sin. But even if they didn't know, isn't it true that there are people in our family who secretly tried to hide sin and it brings it into our family? And other people pay the consequences for it. Family, because it is a place of vulnerability, we can lead each other to sin. Heads of households can lead the family to sin. Spouses can lead each other to sin. So, of course, Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that was a delight to the eyes, that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate." Spouses, we have a tremendous amount of influence over each other. And spouses can lead one another to sin. Or even children can lead parents to sin. In Genesis 19, verses 30 through 32, you'll remember Lot and his daughters. So we read, "Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters, and the firstborn said to the younger, 'Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father.'" Family is a place of great vulnerability. And because of this, one of the things that can happen is we can lead each other to sin if we're not careful. We have a lot of influence over each other. However, family can also lead each other to God. Consider the Philippian jailer in Acts chapter 16, verses 28 through 34. Just before he's about to kill himself, we read, "But Paul cried with a loud voice, 'Do not harm yourself, for we are all here.' And the jailer called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, 'Sirs, what must I do to be saved?' And they said, 'Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household.' And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set food before them, and he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God." As I said, this vulnerability thing is true, but it can cut one of two ways. And sometimes we can lead each other to sin, but people can also lead each other to God through family because we have that kind of influence. So you have the Philippian jailer, you have Crispus in Acts 18 and verse 8. We read, "Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord together with his entire household. And many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized." In fact, this is something that goes back to the law. That God's intention was that family was to lead each other to God and to view God as ultimately important. So in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." There's the image of a house just being flooded with the knowledge of God, the inside of the house and the outside. The family is a place of vulnerability. And sometimes we need to be vulnerable, but sometimes we need to be on our guard because family can take advantage of us. Family can also lead each other to sin, but equally, family can lead each other to God. Because family is a place of vulnerability. So let's get into some familial roles and responsibilities. Now, there are roles within the family, and we're not going to get into them today, because that's really going to be our subjects next week and maybe the week after. We'll see how that goes. But I really want us to get into the responsibilities we have within the family. Some responsibilities we have in the family first is to take care of family. That is a God-given responsibility to the best of our abilities to take care of family. Sometimes this is out of our abilities, isn't it? But to the best of our abilities, we are to take care of family, and especially members of our own household. So in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 through 8, we read, "Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God." She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We have a responsibility to take care of our household. In fact, you'll notice that Paul's instructions to Timothy is, if the family can do it, they should do it even before the church does. So there is an immediacy to family and to providing for family and to taking care of family to the best of our abilities. We're not talking about a situation where it's impossible or difficult. We're talking about people who can do it but are not. Those are the people who have denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever. This idea of being a child of God and obeying God but not taking care of members of our own household, totally contradictory. That is not at all what God has taught us, both in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. So some responsibilities we have within the family is to take care of our own households, to take care of family, to discipline within our households. And by discipline, I mean disciplining in a loving manner, not out of anger. This is really an attribute of God. I have these 3 verses we're going to look at here. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 7. The author of Hebrew writes, "Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline?" In Revelation 3, when you have these words that are spoken to the church that come from Jesus, we read, "Those whom I love I reprove and discipline, so be zealous and repent." And of course, Proverbs 13:24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. So within the family, we do have a responsibility to correct one another, but to do it in a spirit of love. Not out of anger, not out of frustration. This is an attribute of God. This is something that comes from God and God expects of us. So responsibilities within the family are to take care of the family. That includes things like taking care and providing for one's own household. It includes things like correcting each other out of a spirit of love. And it includes things like protecting the family. I think we have a responsibility to protect our own families and our own households to the best of our abilities. Protecting our family from things on the outside. So consider Genesis 14 when Abram protects Lot, who is a member of his household, who has been captured. Right? So we read in Genesis 14 through 16, when Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. Now, there's not a direct command here, but I think this is a very good example. That we have a responsibility to take care of our family, especially if they're captured by a bunch of kings. So we are to protect our family from outside forces, whether those may be physical forces or, spiritual forces, talking about like heretical teachings that are contrary to Scripture. But we also have a responsibility to protect the family from within. So if you have family members from within who are doing things they ought not to do and will not stop, you also have a responsibility to protect the family. Consider, for example, 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 10 through 14. This is talking about Eli and Eli's kids, if you remember that. We read, "And the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant hears. Then the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the two ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." Now, if you remember, Eli's sons were offering sacrifices as priests, and yet they were very corrupt. They were, we'll just leave it there. They were corrupt. And Eli knew about it and didn't stop it. And yet the rest of Eli's house is going to pay for this. And this is what I mean by we have a responsibility to sometimes protect our own families from within. To protect others, because you might have a kid or two who are going off in a wrong direction and will not stop. So those are some responsibilities we have within the family to take care of family. Going to be things like taking care of your own household, be things like disciplining, and things like protecting. Some other responsibilities we have within the family is to put God before family when necessary. To put God before family when necessary. For example, Jesus teaches this in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 38. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." You have to read this in in the context of other passages we've just looked at, things like providing for members of your own household. But we do have a responsibility to put God before family should that ever happen, should that come about. This is taught in the New Testament, and it's also taught in the Old Testament. So in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 6 through 11, we read, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the peoples who are around you, whether near you or far off from you, from the one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him. But you shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and never again do any such wickedness as this among you. Now, for those of you who either have never had to do it or never been around people who have had to do it, this is probably one of the hardest things to do with family, is to put God first. Especially when you have a brother, a sister, a daughter, a son, or a mother or father who has rejected God and gone away from God, to then have to respond to it. That's probably one of the hardest things a person will ever have to do within family. But it is a responsibility we have with family. Another responsibility we have is not to desire the families of others, but to really be satisfied with our own families. So in Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, in the 10 Commandments, one of them, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. We don't look at the people around us and say, man, I really wish I had their family. I know it's tempting sometimes, but we don't do that. We are satisfied with our families, and we are satisfied with the positions God has put us in. And we also appreciate the blessings that we currently have. We don't covet the way God has blessed other people. Because oftentimes we're ignoring all the difficulties they have. Right? There's that Styx song, if you know Styx, The Grand Illusion. If you've never heard that song, I really recommend you listen to it. Because it's the grand illusion. You think your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's life, I should say, that includes his wife. You think your neighbor's life is just fine and dandy and he's got it made. And you just don't realize how difficult your neighbor has it too. It's the grand illusion. So one responsibility we have with family is recognizing it as a blessing of God and not coveting the way God has blessed other people. You don't desire the families of others. You appreciate what you have, and you take on the roles and responsibilities that you currently have. The last responsibility I want to point out is that we are to use our familial experiences, our experiences with family, to better understand biblical concepts. That's a part of the responsibility we have with family, is to enjoy and appreciate family, but to have an eye on God while we're appreciating family. Because the Bible uses so much language about family to describe who He is and how He relates to us. And we are to use our own experiences to better understand God. So consider Amos chapter 3, verse 1. Hear this word that the Lord has spoken against you, O people of Israel, against the whole family that I brought up out of the land of Egypt. Notice God doesn't say, the nation I brought up out of the land of Egypt. Because God views Israel as more than just a nation. God doesn't view Israel like we view China, as just like a nation of people. God views them as family. Or in Isaiah chapter 63, verse 16, one of the few places in the Old Testament where God is referred to as Father, we read, "For you are our Father, though Abraham does not know us and Israel does not acknowledge us. You, O Lord, are our Father, our Redeemer, from of old is your name." That doesn't make much sense unless you have experiences with a father. Or if you're around people who have experiences with a father, maybe you don't have a father. But we are to use our life experiences of family with an eye toward God. Not to just love family and end there. Many people end there. Family is a good thing, but it's not the ultimate thing. You love family, but you use your experiences in family to better understand God. Or Ephesians 5:28 through 32, "In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Marriage is good, but if you're married, you are to understand this helps you to better understand Christ's relationship to the church. You don't just go to marriage and accept the blessing and end there. You enter that with a view toward Christ and the church to see how God views these things. So our experiences in family help us to better understand God. Or Matthew chapter 12, verses 46 through 50, that is Jesus, while he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brothers stood outside, asking to speak to him. But he replied to the man who told him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." If you grow up having brothers and sisters, or one or the other, you have a good idea of what it means that we are brothers and sisters in Christ. This isn't just loose language. God's not just throwing words around. This is meant to help us understand how close we are to each other. I have a brother and a sister. I love them both very much. I've enjoyed my time with them. But my experiences with them helps me to understand my relationship to you. And I'm very thankful for both. But if I just dwell on my experiences with my brother and my sister and say, well, you guys aren't my brothers and my sisters. I love my brothers and sisters a lot, but you don't even come close to comparing. I'm missing the point. I'm supposed to have those experiences with also an eye on the church. You see, you have family and family relationships with an eye on God, because that will help you to better understand biblical concepts. And it will also help you not to make an idol of your family as well. Not to rest in your family as the ultimate in your life. Because that's a really unfair thing to do to people, is to make them the ultimate thing in your life. But people, we can't handle that. That is way too much pressure. So one responsibility we have, the last one I want to leave you with, is that we have the responsibility to use our family experiences to better understand God, to better understand His teachings and the concepts He has laid out in Scripture. Now, family is good. Family comes from God. God created family, as we read in Genesis 1. But family isn't the end of everything. Within family, we have a number of roles and responsibilities. And next week, we're going to get even more into what these roles are. But this morning, I really wanted you to see what the Bible teaches about family and the examples we see. Family is a place of vulnerability. Family is a place where we influence each other. But we also have a responsibility in family to not make it the end of everything. We have a responsibility not to covet other people's families, to be satisfied with our families. We have a responsibility and a stewardship, really, to take care of and to protect our families. And by doing all these things, we better understand God and God's plan for family. What is your place in your family? Do you see yourself as having a place in your family? Who are the people who you can take care of? Who are the people you influence? Family is an enormous blessing. And sometimes it feels like an enormous curse too. But that's just because we hurt each other when we're family as well. You know, when the closer you are to someone, the more likely and the more deeply you will hurt each other. But family is also where we learn to really forgive each other. If you're here this morning and you need prayers, we really ask that you would talk to us, because we consider each other family and we want to pray for you. We want to take care of you. If you need help in any way, whether you have questions, whether you just want to talk to someone, if there's anything at all that we can do for you, we ask that you would talk to us or even come forward now while we stand and sing the invitation song.